In 1961, I was a young fighter pilot in Germany when the first cosmonauts and astronauts were launched into space, and then I began to dream about maybe that would be the ultimate experience for a pilot. And looking out across this large valley where we landed in the central highlands of the moon.
12 men have walked on the moon. 12 men have returned to tell the world what they saw, or at least, what they were allowed to say. But what if the truth was never meant to be spoken? What if behind the cameras, behind the carefully scripted reports, something unimaginable waited on that gray, silent surface? Something that even a seasoned astronaut like Charles Duke struggled to describe for 40 years. In April 1972, during Apollo 16, Duke spent 71 hours on the lunar surface. He followed every procedure, completed every experiment, but what he witnessed changed him forever. Now, decades later, he is breaking the silence. And what he is revealing threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the moon and about ourselves. Secrets of Apollo 16. To understand the weight of what Charles Duke is claiming, you need to understand who Charles Duke is. This was not a man prone to fantasy or exaggeration. He grew up in South Carolina, the son of a naval
General Charles Duke, the Apollo 16 astronaut, was the youngest of 12 people to ever walk on the surface of the moon in 1972. Duke is a native of South Carolina.
Officer, fascinated by flight from childhood. He earned his pilot's license while still in high school. He attended the Naval Academy, became an Air Force pilot, then a test pilot, the traditional path that produced America's astronauts. NASA recruited him in 1966 as part of their 5th astronaut group. He was known for being calm under pressure, technically brilliant, and utterly reliable. These men were not cowboys looking for adventure. They were engineers and test pilots who understood complex systems and followed protocols exactly. There was no room for imagination or speculation in their world. Only data, only procedures, only mission objectives. Duke's first major role was as Capcom, the capsule communicator for Apollo 11. His was the voice from Houston that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin heard during the first moon landing. When the lunar module touched down, it was Duke who responded from mission control. That moment, heard by hundreds of millions of people around the world, captured exactly who Charles Duke was. Calm, professional, focused entirely on the mission. 3 years later, he got his own chance. Apollo 16 launched on April 16, 1972. Duke, along with Commander John Young and Command Module pilot Ken Mattingly, spent 11 days in space. Duke and Young spent 71 hours on the moon itself, longer than any previous mission. The official objectives were scientific. They explored the Descartes Highlands, collected samples, tested equipment, conducted experiments. Everything was planned to the minute. Everything had a purpose, and they accomplished it all. The mission was perfect by every measurable standard. But if you watch the footage from Apollo 16 carefully, if you really watch it, you can see something odd. There are moments where Duke stops, just stops moving, stands completely still, staring at something off camera. Young's voice comes over the radio asking if he is okay. Duke responds, but there is a delay, a hesitation that does not fit the profile of a man known for instant, precise responses. Looking at what? The official transcripts do not say. The mission reports do not mention it. And for 40 years, neither did Duke. Time lost on the moon. When Apollo 16 splashed down on April 27, 1972, Duke and his crewmates were treated as heroes. Ticker tape parades, a White House visit, a world tour. Duke gave hundreds of interviews. He spoke about the technical aspects of the mission.
He would look through the 40, and where his eyesight, then line of sight, hit the ground, that's where he's going to land.
The geology, the experiments, the beauty of Earth seen from space. But he never talked about the things that were not in any mission plan. the experiences that did not fit the scientific framework NASA was presenting to the world. Years passed. Duke left NASA in 1975. He became a businessman, a speaker, a devout Christian who talked openly about how seeing Earth from space had affected his faith. He was open about his life, his struggles, his beliefs. But about certain aspects of his time on the moon, Duke stayed quiet. He gave safe interviews about safe topics. He let people believe the official story. The change started around 2015 when Duke was in his 80s. He began giving interviews that went beyond the standard Apollo narrative. He started using different language, talking about things he had carefully avoided for decades. He talked about the light being wrong, not just different from Earth, wrong. Sunlight on the moon should be pure white, maybe slightly yellow. No atmosphere to scatter it. Basic physics. But Duke described seeing colors that should not exist there, blues and purples that were not reflections. The light itself was colored, and it would shift. He would look away and look back, and it would be different. He talked about sounds. You cannot hear anything on the moon. No air means no sound transmission. Every astronaut knew that. But Duke heard things. Not through the radio. Not mechanical sounds from his suit. Tones, frequencies. Sometimes harmonic, sometimes discordant. He asked John, Young, if he heard it. Young did. They both did. But they did not report it because it was impossible. He talked about the feeling of being watched. Every astronaut who walked on the moon will tell you the same thing if they are honest, Duke said. You feel observed. Not by Houston, that is different. You feel like there is attention on you, presence, awareness, not threatening, but enormous. Like standing in front of something vast that is paying attention to you. Duke described moments where time seemed to behave strangely. They had strict schedules, every minute accounted for. But there were periods where he would be working, focused on a task, and suddenly realize that according to his suit timer, 20 minutes had passed when it felt like 2. Or the reverse. A task that should take 5 minutes would feel like an hour. Young experienced it too. They would compare notes, and their subjective experience of time never matched the clock. The hidden moon. These were not the confused. Reminiscences of an elderly man. Duke was specific, detailed, consistent across multiple interviews over several years, and he was not alone. In 2017, Duke attended a private reunion of Apollo astronauts, one of the few times most of the surviving moonwalkers were together in one place. According to Duke, they had a conversation that night that had never happened publicly. A conversation about what they had actually experienced. Everyone had anomalies, Duke said later. Different things for different missions, but nobody's experience matched what NASA told the public. And they all knew they could not talk about it.
NASA's Artemis II is the first crewed lunar mission in over 50 years.
Not because NASA threatened them. They did not. But because they knew nobody would believe them. Or worse, people would think they had lost their minds. So they kept quiet. All of them. For decades. But Duke, now approaching 90, had decided he was done keeping quiet. The most significant revelation came in a 2019 interview when Duke was 84 years old. The interviewer asked him directly whether he had seen anything on the moon that NASA has not acknowledged. Duke's response was immediate and unequivocal. Yes, absolutely yes. The interviewer asked what he had seen. There was a long pause. The kind of pause that precedes words a man has been holding back for nearly half a century. Then Duke said it. Structures, not natural formations, not rocks that happen to look geometric. Structures, artificial, old, very old. Secrets on the far side. The interviewer, clearly shocked, asked where. Duke explained that they were in the highlands, on the far side of a ridge, out of direct view from Earth. They had driven the rover about 6 kilometers from the lunar module. They were supposed to be collecting samples from a specific crater. but Duke saw something on the horizon. Geometric. Too regular to be natural. He called it out to Young. Young saw it too. The interviewer asked what they did. Duke said they drove closer. It was not on their planned route. But they had some discretion for exactly these kinds of situations. As they got nearer, they could see it more clearly. It looked like a wall or a foundation. Angular, made of blocks, covered in dust but definitely constructed. Maybe 100 meters long, extending into the lunar surface at both ends, as if they were seeing just part of something much larger buried beneath the gray soil. The interviewer asked if they reported it. Duke said they tried. They called Houston and described what they were seeing. There was a long delay, much longer than the normal communication lag. Then they were told to continue with their planned sample collection. No acknowledgement of what they had reported. No request for photographs, no follow-up questions. Nothing. They were experienced enough to understand what that silence meant. Houston did not want them pursuing it. The interviewer asked if they took photos anyway. Duke almost laughed. Of course they took photos, dozens of them. Close-ups, context shots, everything their training had prepared them to document. All of it was on the film they brought back to Earth. The interviewer asked what happened to those photographs. Duke's expression changed. Those photos were never released. Not to the public, not to the scientific community, not to anyone. Duke said he has asked NASA about them multiple times over the years. He is always told they are classified for technical reasons, or they were lost, or they were too poor quality to release. But Duke took those photos himself. He knows exactly what was on that film. The images were perfectly clear, and they showed exactly what he and Young had seen with their own eyes. Artificial structures on the moon. The age of the ruins. But this was not the most explosive claim Duke made. The interviewer asked if the structures looked recent. Duke's answer carried implications that hung in the air long after he finished speaking. No, that is the thing. They looked ancient. They eroded, even though there is no weather on the moon to cause erosion. Covered in impact craters, which meant they had been there for a very long time. Millions of years, possibly longer. They predated anything humans have ever built. They predated humans. The interviewer finally asked the question that had been building since Duke first mentioned structures. Who built them? Duke was quiet for a moment. Then he admitted he did not know. That is what makes this so difficult to talk about. He does not have answers. All he has is what he saw. Someone or something built structures on the moon long before humanity existed, and NASA knows about it, and they have decided the public should not. After this interview became public, Duke faced exactly what he had feared for 40 years. Mockery, dismissal. Mainstream media largely ignored his claims. Skeptics said he was misremembering, seeking attention, or suffering from age-related confusion. But Duke did not recant. Instead, he provided more details. He described other anomalies from the mission, areas where the lunar dust seemed to have been disturbed recently, too recently to match natural processes. Trails or paths that suggested movement across the surface. Glints of metal or glass in crater walls that did not match any known lunar geology. He talked about the way certain areas felt different. You would cross an invisible boundary and the sense of presence would intensify or disappear completely. Like walking through rooms in a house where each one has a different feeling, even though it is all the same structure. The signals. Duke mentioned radio interference that did not match any known source. Brief transmissions on frequencies that should have had no traffic. They would hear bursts of sound, not voices, not mechanical noise, almost musical. NASA said it was probably reflections from Earth broadcasts bouncing off something. But Duke and Young were on the far side of the moon when they heard some of these signals. Nothing from Earth should have been able to reach them there. The geometry was impossible. He described moments of what he called clarity. A few times, usually when he was alone and away from Young, Duke would suddenly understand things. Not thoughts in words, just knowledge. about the moon, about its history, about why they were there. And then it would fade, and he could not hold on to it no matter how hard he tried. But in those moments, he knew with absolute certainty that they were being allowed to be there, that they were guests, that the moon was not empty and never had been. These claims sound like science fiction. They sound impossible. But they were coming from a man with credentials that could not be dismissed. An Air Force brigadier general, a test pilot with thousands of flight hours, an astronaut who performed flawlessly on one of the most complex missions in human history, a man known throughout his career for being rational, skeptical, and utterly honest. Was Charles Duke losing his mind in his old age? Or was he finally telling a truth he had been forced to hide for 4 decades? Hidden in plain orbit. The question became more complicated when other astronauts started making similar admissions. Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon.
It was my extraordinary privilege to have played a role in one of the epic dramas of our age.
Mentioned in a 2018 interview that there was a monolith on Phobos, one of Mars's moons, and suggested that people should want to know what put it there. Edgar Mitchell, who walked on the moon during Apollo 14, had spoken for years before his death about government knowledge of extraterrestrial intelligence. Al Worden, Apollo 15's command module pilot, stated publicly that he believed humans were descendants of ancient aliens who had visited Earth in the distant past. These were not fringe figures desperate for attention. These were men who had been to space, who had seen things the rest of us have not, who had been trusted with billion-dollar missions and performed flawlessly under pressures most humans will never experience. And in their later years, free from NASA employment, no longer concerned with careers or reputations, they were all suggesting the same thing. The official story was incomplete. What they experienced in space did not match what they were allowed to say publicly. There were things about the moon, about space, about our solar system that the public had not been told. Duke's most recent interviews have been even more explicit. In a 2023 podcast appearance, he was asked directly if he believed there was a cover-up. His response was measured but damning. He does not think it is a cover-up in the conspiracy sense. He thinks it is institutional paralysis. NASA does not know what to do with information that does not fit the scientific paradigm they have built their entire organization around. They have data, photos, measurements, observations from multiple missions that suggest the moon is far stranger than the simple dead rock narrative. But they cannot release any of it without fundamentally challenging what people believe about our place in the universe. So they sit on it, year after year, decade after decade. It is not malicious, Duke says. It is institutional cowardice. Eyes on the moon. He was asked what he thinks the structures actually are. His answer was stunning in its implications. He thinks the moon was inhabited. Not now, at least not obviously. But at some point in the distant past, something lived there. Something built there. Maybe, Duke suggested, something built the moon itself. He knows how that sounds. He has had 50 years to think about how crazy it sounds. But when you have stood on that surface and seen what he saw, the question stops being whether this is possible. The question becomes how we integrate this reality with everything we thought we knew. He was asked why he is speaking out now after all these years of silence. His answer was simple. He is 89 years old. He has had a good life and a good career. He does not need NASA's approval anymore. He does not care if people think he has lost his mind. What he cares about is the truth. And the truth is that 12 men walked on the moon, and all of them experienced things that suggest our understanding of the moon, of space, of our place in the cosmos, is fundamentally incomplete. He believes humanity deserves to know. He believes we can handle it. He is not willing to die with this secret still locked inside him. The evidence. So what is the truth? Is Charles Duke describing real experiences, Or has time and age distorted his memories of a mission that happened over 50 years ago? The evidence is complicated, but not dismissible. NASA has never released all the photographs from Apollo 16. Thousands of images remain locked away, officially due to quality issues. But Duke and other astronauts have consistently claimed that some of their clearest photographs, the ones showing anomalies, are among those that have never seen the light of day. Radio. Transcripts from the Apollo missions contain gaps. Sections of the official record note transmission interruptions or technical difficulties during periods when the astronauts claim they were having clear conversations with Houston. Conversations that were apparently not preserved for the public record. Several former NASA employees have corroborated, in carefully vague terms, that there were unusual findings from the Apollo missions that were set aside for further analysis and simply never discussed publicly again. None have provided specific details, citing non-disclosure agreements and classification restrictions, but the fact that such corroboration exists at all is significant. The rocks brought back from the moon have been studied extensively for decades. They confirm the moon is ancient, geologically dead, and never had an atmosphere capable of supporting life as we know it. But Duke argues this does not contradict what he saw. The structures were not built by anything native to the moon. They were built by something that came from elsewhere and used the moon for purposes we can only guess at. The moon's geology tells us its natural history. What Duke saw tells us its archaeological history. The two are not contradictory. Perhaps most tellingly, Duke's descriptions match in surprising detail the anomalies reported by other astronauts from completely different missions. The sense of presence, the strange quality of light, the feeling that time was not behaving normally. The structures. If Duke were simply making things up or confabulating false memories, you would expect his claims to be unique to him. Instead, they corroborate what others have hinted at for decades in interviews, memoirs, and private conversations that have slowly leaked into the public sphere. Duke's lunar confession. Duke addresses the skepticism directly. He has thought about the possibility that his memories are false for 40 years. He has questioned himself more harshly than any skeptic ever could. But he was not alone on that ridge. John Young saw what he saw. They corroborated each other's observations in real time, on the surface, while it was happening. And their experiences match what other crews from other missions have reported. At some point, Duke argues, you have to accept that when multiple trained observers report experiencing the same impossible things, those things are probably real. Even if they do not fit our expectations, even if we have no framework to explain them. Charles Duke is 89 years old. He knows he does not have many years left. He is spending those remaining years doing something that would have been unthinkable earlier in his life. He is challenging the official narrative of the Apollo program that he helped create. Not to diminish its achievements. Duke remains enormously proud of Apollo, of NASA, of what humanity accomplished. But he believes the story we tell about the moon is incomplete. And that incompleteness, he argues, is holding us back. We could have continued moon exploration. We could have built bases and sent more missions and really investigated what is there. But we stopped. We stopped after Apollo 17 in December 1972, and we have barely been back since. Why? The official reason is budget constraints and shifting priorities. But Duke believes the real reason is that the people making decisions realized the moon was raising questions they could not answer. It was easier to stop going than to confront what was being found. For 40 years, the men who walked on the moon held their silence. Secrets buried in the shadows of history, glimpses of something humanity was never meant to see. Or perhaps, never ready to see. Charles Duke is speaking now, in the final chapter of a life spent among the stars. He says the moon is not what we were told, that what we've been taught about space, about our place in the universe, is incomplete, deliberately or not. Photographs exist, data exists. The evidence is waiting in NASA archives, untouched. unseen. The question is not whether the truth is out there. It's whether we have the courage to confront it. What if humanity has been staring at its greatest discovery for over 50 years and refusing to see it? The moon hangs above us every night, serene, silent, and still hiding its story. Are we ready to finally look and to ask the questions that history and the stars have been waiting for?